Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at a member of my classic computer collection. And the machine we're going to have a look at today represents a class of machines that came out in the late 1980s, early 1990s to about 1995. These were IBM PC compatibles running on a 80386 or 486 microprocessor from an ISA bus. The bus itself usually had a few interface cards plugged in, and the whole unit was normally running with Microsoft Windows 3.0 or 3.1 on top of MS-DOS 5 or MS-DOS 6. So these were the boring beige boxes that started to appear, or had appeared rather, on desktops all over the Western world by the early 90s and were starting to make inroads into the home. Now, most of you watching this video will be very familiar with these machines, but there may be one or two younger people that aren't, so let's take a look at them. The computer I'm about to show off has this chip at its heart, the AMD 386 DX40. It's reported to be the best of the 386 CPU family, inexpensive, reliable and fast. From what I've read, even faster than a 486SX microprocessor. So let's go for a tour of the machine. And it is pretty typical of the configuration that you would find in a machine like this from 1991 to, say, 92. My one's a tower model. Of course, a lot of the machines were the flatter desktop models on a different orientation. At the top there you can see a 1.2 megabyte floppy drive. It's a 5¼ inch one. Coming down from that we see a blank space. Now, machines a few years older than this may have had a CD-ROM drive in there, but machines of this particular era, 1991-92, typically they didn't have a CD-ROM drive. Just underneath that space is the 3.5 inch floppy disk drive. Next to that's a power button, and you can see also an LCD indicator there which shows the speed of the processor, and you'll see that when I switch it on. And to the right there's a couple of buttons. There's a turbo button and a reset button, and finally at the bottom there's a lock for the computer. The turbo button was less important on these machines than it had been on earlier machines. Old software sometimes needed the speed latched down in order to work. But by the time these machines came out, modern software that ran on them didn't require stepping the processor down. So really the turbo button became somewhat redundant, and most of these machines were on turbo all the time. There you can see the keyboard. It's a typical AT extended keyboard. The plug at the end of the keyboard cable is one of the old round larger AT type plugs. And there's the monitor, which is a color monitor. By the time these machines came out, color was standard, so you tended to buy them with a color monitor. Machines could typically run Super VGA, as this one does. So coming around the back, you can see there at the top the power supply unit. A couple of plugs there, one for the AC input, another one for the AC output, which can go to the screen. There you can see the keyboard plug and plugged into its socket. Notice the little covered recesses there for DB type connectors. If you wanted to have them coming straight from the case, you could do that. More commonly, they were simply on the cards that you attached. So just coming down here, we can see a RS-232 port with that large DB25 connector there. Beside that's a game port. Further down there's a parallel printer port, and that other cable you can see plugged in is the mouse, and that's running off an RS-232 port, which is a smaller DB connector. Then you've got right down towards the bottom the video connector. You can see the connector from the screen plugged into that, and right at the bottom is the sound card. And you can see I've got my speaker plugged into that particular card. Just note that all of those connectors, except for the power and the keyboard, are coming off cards, and this is pretty typical for machines of this era. Few of the ports were built into the main boards. You actually had to get separate cards to run functions which are really necessary for the running of the machine. You didn't get a good view of the mouse on that fly past, so here it is. It's a Microsoft Serial mouse. If we take the side off the case, this is what we can see. You can see it's quite neat and tidy inside, and one of the characteristics of these machines of this era was that things were starting to get quite modular, so you can see the power supply tucked up on the top left there. Main board is flat on the side of the case with the cards pointing out towards us. This unit is certainly what you'd call a generic PC compatible. It's from Elite Computer Systems Company, at least the main board is, which is a Taiwan-based electronics firm. The chipset is supplied by Pektron, and the BIOS is an AMI BIOS, so American Megatrends Incorporated BIOS. And that's a pretty typical mix for a PC clone machine. Quite a few manufacturers involved in the different bits and pieces. It's quite modular, so you can add and take things away quite easily. Very typical of its era. Here's a look at the cards in situ. We'll have a look at some of these later. And this is the RAM, a full set of 1 megabyte chips in here, giving a total of 8. Here's a picture with those cards removed, and you can see there the ISA slots, or industry standard architecture slots. This architecture was introduced by the IBM AT in 1984 and adopted by the PC compatible industry as a whole. Typically there were 8 of these slots, and as I mentioned before, often they were occupied with cards that fulfilled some pretty basic functions like the video and providing some of the input-output ports for the machine. Just a look at the main board model there. Interestingly, there's no serial number. Here's a look at some of the cards that are plugged into the machine, and this first one is a multifunction card, and it provides a couple of serial ports, a parallel port, there's a game port. It also provides the disk controllers for the hard disk and the floppy drives. Increasingly, main boards were coming out with these functions incorporated on them, but not on this particular machine. Here's the sound card. It's simply a generic Sound Blaster compatible card, which could also do the AdLib standard. I don't know much about this one. It has a Media Vision chip in it, and there's a connector on the end. I'm not sure what that does. Finally, we have this Tenglab 1 megabyte video card. Having that much memory on board certainly leads to good graphics and fast graphics. Okay, so let's start the machine up. Everything roars into life. You can see the little indicator there showing 40 megahertz. That's what the processor is running at. And the first thing to appear on the screen is some information about the graphics card and the BIOS. So you can see it there. I've just used the still shot and also the LCD screen because it gives a clearer image than the CTR. And I've frozen it so you can actually see what comes up first. So a little bit of information about the computer. Got 8 megabytes on board, as you can see. That counter whirs around normally as it checks the memory. So we'll continue on through the boot sequence, and you can see there it's showing some BIOS information, and then it starts MS-DOS. Incidentally, that noise you can hear is not a noisy fan, it's actually very heavy rain on the roof of this garage. So there we go, we're at the C prompt, so we can run a directory. You can see the directories and some of the files on this machine. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with MS-DOS, when the machine booted up, there were 2 files that, if present, the computer would read and would act on, and one of these was config.sys. Config.sys enabled you to put pathways to your driver files for your various bits of hardware, and also some other configuration information as well. There you can see what this particular config looks like. MS-DOS version 5 and above came with this very handy full-screen editor. It was absent in earlier versions, but it enabled you to edit these files. Now the second file was autoexec bat, and these were commands that were executed automatically as the machine booted up. And you can see some of them there in my own autobat file. Now this machine is a Windows capable machine, Windows 3.1, and if you wanted Windows to boot up automatically, you'd normally put a command to the Windows program at the bottom of that autoexec files, but we'll just type it in manually and it will launch Microsoft Windows for Workgroups version 3.11, which was the last version of Windows 3 to come out before Windows 95. And this is what you saw when it started. So this is the program manager, and within this you had icons that if you clicked on them you saw groups of programs. They're actually shortcuts to programs, but you could group programs as to their utility or theme. So here's the main grouping. So these came with Windows, these particular programs. There was the file manager. This was highly useful, and it did away with a lot of those older MS-DOS directory management type programs like Xtree Gold, for example. In the day it was quite nice to get this sort of thing on a PC at last. Fully graphical program, overlapping windows, very useful file manager. It has functionality and buttons that do things you'd even recognize today, like order the files and the directories, show them in different ways. To show you some of the menus. Windows 3.1 had a control panel where you could alter some of the settings of the software. So you can see some of them there: keyboard, mouse, power, drivers. You had settings for multimedia, that if you had the appropriate hardware you could change some settings there. There was this one here too called Enhanced, and if you had a 386 or 486, something no more than a 286, you could actually alter some of the multitasking parameters here, as well as specifying what virtual memory you wanted. In other words, a file on the hard disk which could act as part of the memory. Now just before we leave this main section, I want to talk about this program called the PIF Editor. Now at the time there were still lots of programs coming out that were just for MS-DOS, and of course many users had older MS-DOS programs and they wanted to run them under this Windows environment. And what this PIF Editor allowed you to do is to specify what parameters these older MS-DOS programs ran under. So you could specify whether they used high graphics or low graphics, how much memory they needed, what sort of display usage you wanted, if you wanted it a full screen or a window. And essentially what you did was, using this piece of software, set up a shortcut to your MS-DOS program which could run under Windows comfortably. Actually, if truth be told, a lot of MS-DOS programs, particularly the games, couldn't run comfortably under Windows, and you tended to have to use them in straight MS-DOS mode. There was also an MS-DOS shell that you could go out into. So if you wanted the prompt back in a familiar MS-DOS environment, you could just click this and it would take you there. Just type exit and you would go back to your Windows environment. Here are some of the accessories that came with Windows 3.1, and you can see it's got the usual suspects there: a paintbrush program, it's got a notepad, calculator, a clock, like they all did. It also had this program called Write, which actually was quite a nice little basic word processor. It had the kind of features that allowed you to set up your document. You could alter your fonts and the characteristics of those fonts. It was actually quite a nice little program. Here's just a selection of Windows 3.1 games that came with the package, like the Solitaire, or you could buy like this Missile Arcade game to give you some of those old arcade game experiences in a Windows environment. Some other games I've got on the machine include Tetris, a very addictive game, as I'm sure all of you that have played it will know. And this is my favourite. This was part of the entertainment pack that you could buy for Windows 3.1. This is Jezball, a very challenging game where you had to try and split these balls up into tiny areas, isolate them essentially. Not an easy thing to do, because if any of the balls hit the line as you were trying to make it, you would fail and lose your turn. And finally, there's a good old chess game. Windows 3.11 did have some networking capability as far as the basic operating system is concerned. In this group here you can see some icons that relate to that. And one thing that is missing from this machine that would have been typical of machines of the day is some sort of network or modem card. They were very common. In fact, there was a network card in this machine when I first bought it. So that's a look at Windows 3.11. Now, although this was quite a popular program back in the day, there were still lots of MS-DOS programs coming out, in particular games. Now, at this time, these machines, these 386, 486 machines, PC compatible machines, which in the late 80s really were only affordable for businesses, started to become cheap enough for people to get them for home. So quite a few games titles were coming out to take advantage of the fast hardware. And these games didn't tend to go through Windows. They used MS-DOS because often they addressed the hardware directly, particularly the graphics and sound cards. So here's an example of one. Now I've got to tell you, I don't really know how to play this game. It's called Street Rod 2, but it's got some quite cool music and some quite cool functionality. It helps you become a wannabe boy racer. Now I'm not sure if you use that term boy racer in other parts of the world, but here in New Zealand it refers to somebody young, usually male, who gets hold of a car and essentially increases the performance, adds bits and pieces to increase its speed, and usually then goes out to either race the car with other people or generally become a nuisance to the general public. So here you can buy an old car. You start off with a certain amount of money. It's usually not very much, but it's enough to get you an old heap. Drive it into your garage and do a number of things to it. If you've got a bit more money, you can buy other parts. You can tune it to your specifications, perhaps to get a bit more speed out of it. It's quite nifty actually, and it has quite a good upbeat soundtrack with the game. Makes it quite fun to play. For the times, these were pretty good graphics, and that was pretty good music. So we can have a look at a calendar, a bit like an interactive adventure game in many ways. Turn the sound up or down with the radio there. And this just shows us what we've got in the car or on the car. Then we can hoon on down to the local meeting place, and once you're there you can assess people, potential competitors that you might want to race. So you can see them as they pull up, put the mouse over their cars, you can see what sort of cars that they've got and decide on the basis of that whether you want to actually race them or not. So let's challenge the next one to a duel. So you click on the car. I shouldn't really be doing this because I actually don't know how to drive this car that I've got. I haven't modified it at all, so it'll be a rusty old heap, which even if I did know how to drive it I wouldn't win anyway. So you can see there he is streaking ahead of me as I'm trying to figure out how to start the car. Right, now I'm furiously pushing buttons, assuming that some of them are going to do something. It looks like I'm in an automatic and I've got to actually keep it down the bottom there to get any sort of acceleration. So away we go at a fairly leisurely and pedestrian pace. My competitor is far in the distance. I can't see him, so I'm pretty sure that I won't be winning this race. So we'll just wait till we get to the finish line. He'll probably be waiting for me in order to gloat and take whatever money I bet. And there you can see the result. So if we go back to Burger's bungalow, same things happen. You can race some more people if you want to get humiliated even more, or you can go back to the garage and swallow your pride and try and first of all learn how to drive and modify your car so that it goes a little bit faster. You can also click on the local drug dealer to see if there's anyone that you might want to meet there. And you can also have a look under the bonnet of your potential competitors to see what sort of motor they've got. Not only your motor you can do up, but other things as well. So that finishes our look at this class of machine. It was nice for us PC users to finally get a decent graphical user interface in Windows 3.0 or 3.1, and although it wasn't as good or as stable as what you could get on the Macintosh at that time, at least it was a step in the right direction, and having a graphical user interface in Windows 3 or Windows 3.1 did cement the PC compatible line of computers in a very dominant position and started to chip away at the inherent advantage of the Macintosh. All this benefited Microsoft most of all, and it became the dominant player for many, many years in the PC market. Well, thanks for joining me on that look at my own boring beige box. Keep well, and we'll see you in the next video.